All right.
And we'll share it with you as well. I can send you a PDF of the.
Oh, great. Great. Thank you.
All right. So this is just another project in Central Park. One of the things that Yul and Valerie also mentioned was the idea of native plantings and alternatives to lawn. So if anybody has been to Central Park, you know, it's mostly grass. There's a lot of forest areas too, but so this was a project that I worked on when I was there that was taking this grassed slope that was really eroding a lot. So it was basically, they tried to put grass on it, but it just turned into mud because it was all just flushing through every time it rained. So what they did here was create a native meadow along the slope. So what a native meadow does is really hold the soil from eroding. So this is another really important thing for Sussex County, where it is like going into the dunes or going into a land that slopes down to the water, is really holding that edge from eroding. Because as soon as that erodes, all the chemicals that are in that soil are going into our waterways. And this is just an example of how native plants can be really used to stabilize slopes. And it also incorporates multi-use trails. So a lot of the things that we do with landscape architecture is really trying to connect people to the landscape. So we do designs, and most of them are incorporating people inside of it so that they get used to this idea of what ecology means, and kind of getting used to the idea that you can use these certain plants in your yard rather than grass or other alternatives. All right, so Emma, you want to talk a little bit about yourself too?
Thanks, Maggie. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Emma Ruggiero. I'm a master's student at the University of Delaware, currently studying plant soil sciences. But before that, I graduated from University of Delaware, also with my bachelor's in landscape architecture. So I think I mentioned before, I'm originally from Chester County, which is in the headwaters of this watershed. But I grew to love the coast because I grew up partially on the eastern shore of Maryland. So I really grew to love the coast. And I currently study living shorelines, which are nature-based protection for coastal environments, which basically encourage like natural regrowth of marsh along the coastlines, which is really important as we talk about, you know, sea level rise, and so that pressure from the seaward side, but then also the pressure from the landward side with the development that your group is really focused on. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the more technical side and a little bit less about the design side, which Maggie covered, and a little bit about why native plants are really important and, you know, what they can do if used in the situation that you're looking to promote them for. So native plants are really well adapted to their environments. They grew up with these specific soil and light conditions that they needed to be robust and encourage a really healthy ecosystem. And because of it, they require less water and less maintenance. They've usually adapted like some sort of pest resistance because they've sort of co-evolved with those different pests. And overall, they can be less costly to maintain than the traditional turf grafts used in suburban communities, which has a lot less ecological function. They also provide habitat for native wildlife, especially bees and insects, which are the basis of the food chain that allows, you know, birds to grow, other animals that eat insects, and that sort of builds up the food chain, which is so important to biodiversity along the coast. This new concept, this sort of new concept of planting design in landscape architecture is really going toward planting in ecological communities, which just sort of means that the designers are researching what would have traditionally or natively grown in an area and together, and what sort of relationships those plants have together. Because the diversity of plant species, it encourages the overall resilience of the environment. Oftentimes native species have a lot deeper root systems, which allow them to access more nutrients and water, and allow them to infiltrate more water, which is really important when we talk about development and urbanization, which I'll talk a little bit. But also this layering of different plant species creates niches for wildlife, both above ground and below ground, which is really important to soil quality and things like that. So yeah, when we talk about impervious cover and development at the coast, it's really important because as those impervious surfaces or those gray surfaces like roads and streets are built, it allows a lot less water to infiltrate into the ground. And you can see in like the bottom left-hand diagram, that would sort of be this sort of suburban development for that residential, where it's about 30 to 50% impervious surface. About 30% of that water runs off. And as Maggie was mentioning, that sort of pushes a lot of the storm water that comes to flood the creeks, but also, and that contributes to water quantity issues and then water quality issues as well. Grass is better than purely impervious surfaces, but still a lot of water runs right off of grass as sheet flow. And so having those plants that have those deep root systems are really important to infiltrating. So it reduces flooding, it reduces stream bank erosion, and it also replenishes the groundwater aquifers. So in this area, it's especially important when it comes to the tidal creeks, because water is coming in for sea level rise, and that flooding becomes really important. So this is just a little bit of what Maggie was hitting on earlier. In places where new development is, they have to account for that storm water that's going to run off of the impervious surfaces. And oftentimes that means building a detention basin, which is just a place for water to stay before it slowly leaves and gets back into the system. But those grass depressions don't have a whole lot of ecological value versus a bioretention, which is a lot more of an ecological perspective to stormwater management, which allows native vegetation to infiltrate the water, which is so important. This map just shows the site that you are all meeting to talk about today. And I just think it's important to think about, you know, sea level rise and how it's an issue of the future, but it's also an issue right now. Delaware's the lowest lying state, I think, as someone mentioned previously. And also just due to the natural sinking of the land, natural geologic land subsidence, it's really going to be a lot of pressure at the coastline with the development. And these are really sensitive habitats. Like tidal marshes are some of the most important habitats, and Delaware is well known for that habitat that it provides to migratory birds, to horseshoe crabs, but that also protects the coastal communities behind it. So they're really vulnerable landscapes and really ecologically important landscapes. So overall, like there's all this value to planting native plants, but there's so much more value, ecosystem services, and you can sort of see on the wheel here what those might be. Someone mentioned before, like carbon sequestration, or if this, you know, if development is happening, like it can increase people's property value. So there's a lot of different ways that this can be spun toward attracting different people who have different interests. However, like this lawn culture in suburban areas, it's challenging because it has little ecosystem value. And it's not to say that suburban areas can't have any lawns. It just means, you know, sort of designing your lawns to be apart and planting with native species around it if you are someone who needs a lawn for your dog or for your kids to play. But it's sort of going to be a shift in preferences that sort of takes people away from this very manicured lawn that requires a lot of maintenance and fertilizers, and this very open to incorporating more native plants that are really beneficial and provide a lot of the services that are so important to the ecosystem. So with that, we thank you all for inviting us and your interest, and we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.